Today, Ecuador bans Bitcoin, Bank of England pushes for savings confiscations, and coffee is terrorism. Your host is Rick Folkvinger, and this is Liberties Report.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Good evening and welcome to Liberties Report July 26. Computer giant Dell has embraced Bitcoin as a means of payment, making it by far the largest corporation to accept a non-governmental currency that doesn't have a central bank. We appear to be approaching a point where most merchants accept Bitcoin, thereby solving the chicken and egg problem for such a disruptor. According to the computer giant, quote, "If you're a retailer, there is really no reason not to accept Bitcoin at this point," end quote. Prices of Bitcoin did exactly what they had been doing for the past several weeks on this news, that is, absolutely nothing. However, everybody's not so amused at the currency that cannot be seized, cannot be seen, has no controllable middlemen, and can hardly be tracked. Ecuador's legislature decided this Thursday afternoon to ban Bitcoin altogether in a 91 against 22 vote, including its emission, production, and circulation. Yes, you heard that right. Since Bitcoin travels and circulates on the internet seems to be now forbidden in Ecuador. Of course, that wasn't the intention of the legislature, who probably just didn't quite understand what they just voted on. Instead of Bitcoin, however, the Ecuadorian legislature voted to create a new national digital currency backed by Ecuador's central bank. We've got cryptocurrency expert Data Veteran, his Twitter handle, on the line today to comment on the concepts on a governmental cryptocurrency, which he has studied extensively. Sir, thank you for joining us today. Could you please comment on this Ecuadorian move?
Well, I would say that their goal to create a state-based cryptocurrency will fail for sure.
How can you be so certain, sir?
Well, it depends how you define a digital currency. The reason why Bitcoin transactions are cheap is because of an open network. And open networks are always vulnerable to hacker attacks. To overcome this problem, new money in the Bitcoin network is always created by the network for the network. The moment where this contract is breached, so that a human being can create currency or money into this system, it is almost vulnerable to hacker attacks immediately if the network is open. So for this reason, the banking system has a closed network.
So what you're saying is that this is a contradiction in terms. You can't have a digital currency backed by a central bank and still have it secure. Is that right?
Well, it depends on how you define a digital currency. So a closed network implies that you can imagine that you open up the network, but then it becomes very vulnerable, because if there is a person inside a central bank having the ability to create money, it is just a question of time when that hacker can get that information either by an insider or by some hacking attempts to get access to that ability to create money and then flood the system with that money, and that will collapse the monetary system.
Thank you for your insight, sir. Looks like the Ecuadorian government is in for a bit of a wake-up here. Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa is expected to sign the bill into law on banning Bitcoin. There is no word yet on when the Ecuadorian legislature will vote on banning gravity. The penalties in Ecuador for using Bitcoin apparently include confiscation. Yeah, good luck with that. Confiscation seems more of a reality in the old banking system, though, as faith in the large currencies across the world continue to tumble, particularly the US dollar and the euro. Governments are looking for a way out of the mess they created when they bailed out banks in 2009, thereby converting a huge bank debt into a huge governmental debt, which is a bad idea for every taxpayer imaginable. So in the scenario where the central bank currency debt bubble is much larger now than it was just a few years ago, And whereas there's very little more governmental leash to take from for the banks that claim they are too big to fail. Bank of England's governor, Mark Carney, is now proposing to a G20 meeting to standardize the process of so-called bail-ins. This is a pretty term meaning governmental confiscations of ordinary people's bank deposits to save the government, or for that matter, the bank. This has happened on a few occasions in history and rarely with good result, not to say never. Similar things happened in Argentina in the run-up to their financial collapse in 2001, then again in 2008, and it happened in Cyprus last year. Of course, most people would just use the more technical term, shameless theft. Such ordinary citizens would be less than happy both at seeing their savings confiscated to save a mismanaged economy and the mismanaged economy in the first place. So as preparations for such measures continue, the obvious conclusion continues to spread. Bitcoin users are not affected because Bitcoin cannot be seized. Nor, for that matter, is it deposited into a bank in the first place. It's more akin to having cash at home. Who would have believed 10 years ago that having cash at home may be the safer option for savings? Ah yes, having cash at home or cash at all is obviously a problem for this last-ditch effort to save the failed corporations we call banks. And in a funny coincidence, the United States FBI recently released new guidelines on spotting terrorists. And it turns out that paying for everyday things at a cafe with cash is now one of them. Yes, you heard that right. If you pay for a cup of coffee with cash, you may be a terrorist, according to the FBI. Some people would connect dots at this point and say it's all a conspiracy. I would disagree with that. By Occam's razor, I don't think a conspiracy is necessary to explain what's happening. It's just a number of independent arrows, all pointing in roughly the same direction. A couple of very major central banks are on their way down. When that happens, Bitcoin will remain unscathed and be a major candidate for a new world reserve currency, if not a world currency, possibly the world currency. Non-governmental money. Imagine that. Governments are losing control over money, and by extension, over taxation, and by extension again, over their own government's funding and operational staying power. Wow. What an interesting world we live in right now. I'm Rick Falkvinge, and this is Liberties Report. Good night.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Liberties Report is produced using exclusively free software.